my youth.
Nice.
Yeah, that's an excellent selection too, and I love the comparison of like the Olympics because I always think like I prefer the Winter Olympics personally, and I'm pretty sure that's video game related, but I don't want to like dig that up right now. But like watching someone like ski or do like the luge or skeleton or anything that would like terrify me, I kind of completely empathize with that feeling of like you have to be a completely different like being. Like clearly you are not of the same realm as I.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so our final question for the Q box round and kind of our I think this one's kind of a staple for us now is what are you playing right now, if anything, or what have you played most recently?
Cool. Yeah. Right now I'm kind of playing a mixed bag of games. I pick up whatever I'm feeling like. So Super Mario 3D World just came out, and I've been playing that with a couple of friends. It's online now, and the game is just, just so great. It's just so much fun and joyful and goofy, and there's little secrets hidden everywhere, and you want to chat and figure out where they all are. And it's game's surprisingly hard, but then there's all these ways to couch the difficulty. It's great. I've been kind of poking at Dark Souls 2 and 3, enjoying playing those,
Mm.
really trying all the online stuff a lot, like getting summoned and everything. I got obsessed with Picross and just ended up playing like a whole Picross game on the Switch, and I didn't know about Picross, and now I know about Picross, which is dangerous because it's
Yeah.
it's a wonderful game. It's so great, and the Switch version just has such good sound effects and music that it's wonderful. Like everyone else, I've been playing Among Us. We have an Among Us group. I jump in every week or two, every couple of weeks actually, I'd say, and join them playing that. And we just bought the board game Azul, which is very fun as
Oh
well.
yes, that is a good one. My sister owns that, and I was introduced. I recommend that to her because she was looking at a recommendation from me, and then I reached out to a friend who loved that game. So very familiar with Azul.
Yeah, my partner knows that I like anything if it's on a grid, which might not surprise you if you played Ikenfelll, but I love grids, just not grids, yeah. And so Azul's obviously very good, but we also really liked Patchwork a lot, and we were like,
Mm.
what's like Patchwork? So Azul was a good choice. My next up to play is Outer Worlds, Slay the Spire, and Valheim,
Ooh,
which
good ones.
all of those I'm looking forward to.
Sweet. A man with a plan. I like this. Like everybody has a game, but no one has a game that they're planning on playing, or at least a list. So this is, I love it. Good. This is awesome to hear. Cool. Well, Chevy, thank you so much for sharing that and diving in a bit more with the Q box round. Definitely fun there. But now we're gonna go right into the meat of the discussion here, and our topic today is future planning part two, specifically involving collaborators as a smaller dev. So some quick context here. Some of you may remember episode 138. Mustapha and I were talking about the importance of future planning, and a lot of that, came down to like collaboration and other elements like that. So we thought it'd be a really appropriate to reach out to Chevy here to talk more about the process and everything else that was involved. Because I mean, though it was from our own experience, we definitely didn't think that we could do it justice compared to what Chevy is able to share with us today. So that's what we're talking about. And without further ado, I'll just hand it over to Mustapha again and to kick this discussion off.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I'm happy to. I'll be upfront. I'm going to try my hardest not to fanboy, but Ikenfelll was hands down like one of my favorite games last year. I completely, had a blast start to finish, and I felt as I was playing it that like the future planning episode that we did, a lot of it was about kind of the pacing of coming to realize the potential of an idea, and then kind of the practical components of putting it together. And so kind of with a game that has to balance, the very inventive like combat and very detailed like world building and story, and having a soundtrack with such a vast array of incredibly competent collaborators, like we want to discuss kind of some of the phases of that process. So I guess to kick off and actually like ask a question, what was kind of the aha moment When designing Ikenfelll, when did you know that you wanted to see the idea through? And what were some of the first things you did to kind of push that further and get the ball rolling when you came to that realization?
Oh, cool. Yeah. There, yeah, there's like a mini aha moment and then like a bigger aha moment. The mini one being was after I read um Carry On by Rainbow Rowell, the book. It's a fantasy book about magic kids, but the this won't be surprising to anyone, but the story takes place sort of like as if it was in the middle of a series
Hmm.
of magic school books, like something like the unspoken story that we don't talk about anymore. But yeah, and it's very cool. It was very nice to jump into a story like in the middle, as if all these characters knew each other and had pre-existing relationships and had there was all this backstory to them. All the characters were really well realized, but you just jumped in. It was the only. It's like the first. It was the only book. Now she's writing sequels and stuff now, but it was a standalone, and it felt very cool. It felt very real, and it felt like she had spent a lot of time thinking about what they were. Um, and I really thought that was a great place to do it because it's very hard to pick the beginning of a story and then pick the ending of a story, and have everything kind of follow through really well because there's so much you have to do. Like every relationships can't really count if they're rushed, and there's all this stuff. And it also so many video games have very blank characters because they don't can't really afford to spend too much time building them up. So what if they were already built up? Which a lot of some AAA games are very good at doing this with their writing. You jump in and this person has a whole history and they leak little bits about it to you. Movies do this really well.
Mm.
And I was like, I think this can do it. And then when I thought about the idea of a magic school, I was like, that's perfect. I can make a box, a big school, and just draw a box, and I can squeeze the whole game in there. It won't be able to scope out of my control. Like, if I can't fit it in that box, it doesn't go in the game. And that sounded great to me. I was like, there's an end. Like, it's so hard to control scope, especially when you're making something like an RPG, which I've tried to make probably 400 times. I'm almost not exaggerating how many times I've tried to make an RPG, and it's very, very hard to figure out where to put stuff and like where to stop and where to begin and how big to make things and how to connect things. But when you're in a box, you're like, well, I need a room that does this or a scene to happen. There's only one place I can put it. There's only this one room is the only place where that can go. And so I was like, well, that's where it goes. And then once you got something that has to go somewhere, when you've painted yourself into a corner, which is a design thing you'll probably hear me talk about a lot. My favorite thing to do is to paint myself into a corner. Instead of being creative like the sky's the limit, be creative in the sense that, like, here, you've got a toothbrush, some string, some chewing gum, and a duck. Make something great out of that. Like, that's fun. That's where you get real good ideas and real fun ideas is when you're painted in. And so I was like, well, that's what I'll do. I'll paint myself in. And then every design decision I had to make that I don't know like the full implications of, I'll just make very limited and paint myself in and then just be creative within those bounds. And I realized that I think was a really good way to design for me, someone who just like always wants to go bigger, bigger, bigger. I found kind of like a way that I could do that. And then I had a whole like story. So then I was like, well, I kind of like this. And then I was getting all these ideas for the story. So I just sat down and just wrote characters for like weeks and weeks while I was kind of like putting together the game engine and stuff. And then the second aha moment was when I had decided on the battle system. It was first a Zelda style action game, and then I didn't like how all the gameplay took over all the levels. The levels couldn't be places or puzzles or anything because they all had to be like where combat and gameplay happened. So I couldn't do something like, and also like because it was so small and cramped, like every room just had to be a big open square, or else it felt really bad. Like, and you see this in a lot of games, actually, action games. Like, you're like, here, let's go into the library. And just like a big, huge open square so that gameplay happens and doesn't suck. And then you're like, well, this is just a big open square. That's not that's kind of not good. And so then I moved into a tactical game where only some rooms were going to be battles, and it was still like overhead, more so like Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics. And then I went and played a bunch of those games, and I played Fire Emblem, and I saw the battle system, and I loved how they went into this little cutscenes every time someone attacked, because they were like, well, we don't want these little pixel characters to attack. Let's have a big old, like, basically, like,
Yeah.
scene. And Shining Force does this as well. And I love those Fire Emblem animations, especially in some of the early ones. They were incredible. The motion blurring, the stretching, the squashing, the every character looked so like themselves and had their own fighting style, and it looked really neat. And it was cool seeing those sprites blown up really big, so you could see what how they stood and how they carried themselves. And I was like, I want that. I want that. So I mocked up because I was like, oh, this game's not big enough already. What if the battles had bigger, harder to draw graphics? Because I was very smart. And so I mocked up all the characters and a bunch of enemies in that style, and I was just like, I like how this looks. So then I made it. Then I came up with like a more of a limited grid-based system, and then I looked at Mega Man Battle Network and Robotrek, which were two games I really, really like, especially Robotrek. I was in love with that game, and no one knew about it, so I was like, I could rip off a bunch of stuff from that, and no one will know because no one played Robotrek. And also, it was a lot of good ideas that weren't executed well, so I was like, I could probably execute a lot of the ideas it was trying better because I've had 20 years of more like to learn than they ever had. They were trying to innovate. I'm just kind of building on what they started. And so, yeah, once I had all that, I was like, okay, I've got a game. Like, I've prototyped this. This is fun to play. I really like it. I like the story. I like the engine's working great. So then I did the Kickstarter because that's when I was like, this is the thing. I can make this. It's scoped okay. I can draw everything, etc.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like, and one thing I want to call out that you mentioned before earlier was simply, identifying like that almost in a way kind of a strategy, like a design strategy, and just like, hey, I want to kind of limit myself here. And the thing I want to call it too is it's the same exact thing that basically Ken Levine, formerly at Irrational Games for BioShock did with BioShock. And I mean, that was a big component, I think, to that overall game success is just the whole the limitations that were set, and like you said, being creative. And another one too is Silent Hill, the original Silent Hill. That was, I think, more of restrictions with the platform and the initial scope, trying to be so big, and then they're like, we can't be as big as we want to. But then in essence, they created all the fog and everything else, and it again makes so through limitations you can find ways to make a really immersive experience. So I think I just want to call out to you too and compare it to some of these other like great games out there too, because it's a great process to work from, and it sounded like it really benefited you very well.
Yeah,
it definitely did.
Yeah, and I would chime in to also say, like, because I know like a lot of people, especially for like newer devs, they hear the creative types especially have this response to the idea of like narrowing scope that kind of makes them feel like they have to like stifle their vision and like shave off these pieces of kind of like their artistic integrity. But like having played the game, hearing you now talk about decisions that were made with scope in mind, if you approach them with like a creative and inventive enough approach, like I feel like the design of the school, to me, I never once thought of that as like, oh, that's a self-imposed limitation. I thought of it as like, this is a creative and self-contained idea that works within the story that it's trying to tell and can kind of stand on its own in that way, but also under the hood perhaps allowed you more flexibility in like the things that you could do within that space without necessarily overwhelming yourself with, all sorts of additional systems and things like
Right.
that.
Exactly.
So I think to kind of really put that emphasis on it from a future planning point of view, the key isn't necessarily, it's not about cutting corners. It's more about finding creative and productive solutions to, kind of still create something meaningful and good while also not necessarily creating something massively out of scope and forcing yourself into, development hell.
Yeah, you're not cutting corners. You're just, instead of building a new house, you're painting the interior of the one you already live in.
Yeah. Great analogy and way of putting it.
Yes. Very apt. So to kind of talk about some of the additional steps, when did you start considering kind of the collaborators for this game, like the relationship with Humble and then some of the composers and vocalists, and what did kind of your process in starting those relationships look like?
Cool. Yeah, so once I had known what I was doing, that it was a party-based game, it was about a group of people where not no one was really the main character. Everyone had a lot of attention and time, and also had kind of a storyline and a relationships with each other.